Folks, welcome back to the Land Fixer podcast. I'm your host, Logan Swanson, and I keep thinking I need some intro music or something. Some sweet guitar. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we're here to talk all about land investing, retail investing, developing land, all the different eccentricities, anything land related. Okay, that's what we talk about here. Today, I picked a topic because I was lucky enough to go kind of interview, really just have a long conversation with a surveyor friend of mine where I was able to pick his brain on all things surveying and get a bunch of the questions answered that I've really had for a long time. Since we have bought and sold a lot of properties, we'd hired various surveyors to do various things and gotten varied results as far as cost, expectations, quality of work, timeliness, really across the board. And it's kind of made me recognize the fact that I just don't know much about what surveying is, who surveyors are, but I find it very fascinating. It's like this naturalist sort of business where you're sort of an engineer, scientist, lawyer out in nature. I've hired surveyors to go survey bits of mountain desert land in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's really a cool gig, all things considered. So today I decided, hey, let's put it all together. I went and did some research independently, talked to a friend of mine here who's a surveyor, and hopefully I'm just going to give you a good amount of information on what is a surveyor, what do they do, when do you need them, how do you hire them, and kind of hopefully fill that gap in your knowledge of what is a surveyor. Hopefully there will at least be some helpful hints or tips that you can glean from this. And we'll talk about it at the very end from like the investor standpoint to the protected consumer standpoint to the value add standpoint. Okay. So first off, the big question, what is surveying? I know fundamentally most of us are going to think, well, they confirm the boundary or even just mark the boundary. Really, a lot of people think that's mostly what they do. They just go mark boundaries. Well, it's a little bit more than that. Okay. It's like a science slash art. It involves going out measuring and mapping the environment using mathematics, specialized technology and equipment. But at its core, surveying is determining three-dimensional positions with points and the distance and angles between them. All right. These data points are crucial for determining the exact legal property description for a property, planning and designing the way that you're going to build on it or subdivide it, and really whatever infrastructure projects you're going to be doing on the property. So back in the day, and this is a tradition as old as time, as soon as they decided that one person could own a piece of land and another person couldn't, effectively this job of surveying was invented, right? Because somebody had to go out there and say, hey, this is ours and that's yours. So natural boundary lines existed for probably the longest time, right? This river on this side of that mountain, so on and so forth. But as the plots got smaller and smaller, you had to come up with this whole science and methodology behind, okay, I own right here, I own just this spot and over, and it's in the middle of a field, and there's nothing really to distinguish where my property begins and yours doesn't. It's all built off of arbitrary points, and it's so complicated and nuanced. And not only is it a difficult science if you have good records of where the property line is that you can begin to do your work off of, like a pre-existing established property line, but oftentimes even the details of who owns what is very messy and difficult to determine. For example, there's an entire courthouse here in Texas. I forget the county specifically, but there's a county here in Texas where all the courthouse burnt down, so all the property records are gone. So there's a bunch of surveyors and subdivided land that was contingent on a boundary from a different survey, and that original survey doesn't exist, and that could go back 6 or 7 chains. So wow, it's this big confusing mess. But luckily today, things are getting better, right? Most of these surveys are being digitally recorded and updated, and they're accessible online, and less are you, you know, needing to rely on actual printed and filed documents stuff in some box in the courthouse somewhere. We're not using, probably should have looked up all the different names for the old tools that surveyors used to use that were kind of not electronic, right? But, modern technology has made surveying itself much easier and much more precise. So now you can use GPS, drones, different laser scanning technologies to really capture data with a lot of precision. And this stuff is evolving very quickly. The surveyor that I spoke to last week said that, the future and really the short term future, this isn't, we're not talking decades from now, but maybe even just a few years from now, your surveyors are going to be one man operations with a drone in the field. And that drone can be equipped with LIDAR and all sorts of stuff. So you can send out a single drone and not only get like not only get a piece of paper. Oh, I have one just like this, where it's, white, and then maybe there's a little bit of the topography drawn in, and then there's boundaries over it. So you can go to the field and kind of understand where those boundaries are. But when you mix that with like high quality drone aerial imagery, you can overlay the survey right over the topography itself. So it just makes it super clear. And you can combine that with like GPS mapping software. So you can actually be walking out on the property and walk with the image of the surveyed property on your phone. So this stuff is just, whoa, you kind of do this roughly already using some of the mapping softwares like land.ID or Onyx Hunt has very similar softwares, but it's going to get so exact and so precise in a short period of time. You're actually seeing a lot of drone companies in conversation with surveyors right now to figure out how they can just combine it, right? So instead of me going to hire a droner separately from a surveyor, I'm going to be able to hire one guy who's going to go out there and give me excellent drone footage and overlay the exact boundaries of the property right over the imagery itself. And it's going to make the selling of land very simple in terms of people knowing exactly what they're buying. So yeah, I kind of went off the handle there, but I think it's so fascinating. Surveying is such an interesting topic for me. And really, the cool part is, in America, a lot of the early Americans were surveyors. So you can talk about George Washington. He was a land surveyor. Benjamin Banneker. I mean, go down the line and you can find a bunch of our founding fathers and the big historical figures in American history were land surveyors because what did they do? They showed up to this huge continent that, they were in the process of stealing from some native folks. But the way that they went about organizing that is by cutting it up and, saying you own this and you own this and just surveying. It was a ton of surveying. So let's go into the types of surveys. And this is a short list. I'm sure there's a lot more. And the one that we most commonly run into is the boundary survey. All right. So my house, for example, my neighbor, I'm pretty sure they poured like a very ugly driveway that slightly encroaches on my property. Not big enough for me to go hassle with it, but I could go hire a surveyor. A surveyor could come out and mark the boundary of the property and say, hey, you built this on my property and you take it off right now, sue them or whatever. Or in the vacant land industry, right? We're going to use surveys to say, you could buy 5 acre parcel in the middle of nowhere. And you go out there and there is no clear indications or markers to tell you where your property is as opposed to your neighbor's property. So that surveyor is going to work a bunch of magic and go out there and drop stakes and flags and tell you where your property is in relation to your neighbor's property. So you don't go out there and start building a house or any sort of improvements or fencing it in and actually be putting that money into your neighbor's land or cutting across your neighbor's land or whatever else. Next, you can have topographical surveys. These are very, very important, right? And this is going to do outline. Actually, you can kind of see it on this one, but it's going to outline the contours of the property itself. So where it's moving uphill or downhill. And this is very important for a number of reasons, but one of the biggest ones is anytime you're going to be improving or developing a piece of land, you need to know where the water is moving. So if there's a big downpour of water Where is it moving? What part of the property is it running to? Is it channeled or is it going to be sitting somewhere? Is there a huge amount of floodplain? Those topographical surveys are huge when it comes to any sort of development, construction, or even environmental management projects. All right, then you have geodetic surveys. This I was less familiar with, okay? The geodetic survey is when you use satellite or aerial imaging technologies to measure large areas of the Earth's surface, providing data for global positioning systems and various scientific applications. So this isn't something that you're going to be running to in real estate very often unless you're going to buy a country or something, maybe. If any of you are buying a country, let me know. I'd love to be a part of that process. And then we have one that's actually very useful for land investors that they may not have thought of. And I'm going to get to this in the end, but you have construction surveys. Okay. And what a construction survey is going to do is, you already have the boundary survey marked out, but you have identified where you want to put your house on a property. So oftentimes you'll bring in a surveyor again to mark the corners or all the different angles of where the home is going to be built because they can be very mindful of legal setbacks. So you might be in a subdivision of lots where you can't build 35 feet from the edge of the easement that services the utilities, right? You might not know where that easement edge is, let alone where you're going to start building your house. So you have to have a surveyor come out. He's going to mark your property. He's going to mark that easement. And then he's also going to mark where you're going to build your home. And that's the survey point that your dirt workers are going to go off to put your home pad in place or whatever else. But and that's for just residential, but this is huge, right? So you can have huge commercial developments. Like right now I think Saudi Arabia, they're building the line. Talk about a crazy development project. If you haven't looked into this, they're building like a multi-mile long city that's, I don't know, a few hundred meters wide. And the first step was just hundreds and hundreds of surveyors going out there and marking where things were going to go. So there's a bunch of different ways that surveyors are used. Those are some of the basic ones. And, as you might assume, different surveyors are going to specialize in different types of surveys. So you're going to see this in, like, most commonly, if you see someone driving by that has a surveying company, Aero Surveying, I think is one that's local to me here. They're probably doing a lot of that residential. Maybe they're getting into commercial, but some people are only dealing with hydrographic surveys that do underwater features. Some only do contour surveys. Some only do construction surveys for specific companies. Like my buddy, almost all of their projects are done for textile. So that's almost all they do is mark where roads go. It's the constant process of going out and marking where roads go or where they're going to widen or where the ditches are going to be and just running for miles and miles. There's surveyors who don't even go to the field. Here in Texas, sometimes we even just call them landmen, but their main job is to do that sort of in the depths of a courthouse research where you are going and digging through boxes and reviewing surveys from the past in order to identify the legal area of ownership for an individual landholder. I mean, they're going to be investigating deeds and leases and other legal documents to ensure that the property that the title company is going to insure and say, is this property? And that, for I think most of us, seems very black and white, but it really is not. You could actually have a piece of property that is very contentious in terms of what the actual boundaries are. And you could go hire 3 different surveying companies and they could all come back with different results, depending on how gray or unclear those boundaries are. Most of us think it would be very clear, but sometimes it is very, very open to interpretation. So a couple more items that I wanted to cover, so probably one of the biggest questions that you might have is, there's different types of surveying firms. How do I pick? Right? So if I'm going to go hire a surveyor, what should be the most important thing for me? One, it's important to recognize there's a bunch of different types of firms. Like you have large civil engineering firms that mostly deal with big commercial developments or maybe big road improvements or, the big sort of infrastructure improvements or city projects that are going on. And if you approach them and you say, hey, I'm buying a 1 acre lot here in Navarro County, Texas, can you do a survey for me? They might say yes, but there's no way that they're going to give you a competitive rate, right? Because they're not just paying for a surveyor in a single operation. This is a single division of this much bigger company that has all these people to feed along the chain. So, for the bigger project that you have, you're probably going to want to hire a bigger firm. So there's like mid-sized surveying firms that are very useful to work with because you don't have to go find all the different components to do a development, right? If you need a surveyor that's specialized in boundaries, they have that person. If you need a surveyor that's specialized in going to verify the records in the courthouse, they already have that guy there too. If you need a civil engineer to, handle a certain section of it, maybe you also need an attorney that's very familiar with, these firms just have all the tools in place. So if you're doing a big subdivision or even a modest size subdivision, but still complicated subdivision, it could be very worthwhile working with a, say, medium sized surveying firm because they might have a bunch of stuff in place to take a bunch of the workload off of your plate. You'll pay for it, but it could be well worth it. Then you have boutique surveying firms that are going to operate in really specific niches. Kind of like I was talking about with my buddy, they do mostly tech scout work. They get maybe some big specific contracts, and that's their bread and butter, and that's usually what they're doing. Then you have my favorite. You have your one person operations. So you have, and really 1 to 3 is what I'd call it, like a 1 to 3 person operation. So you can have like your man in the field who's out there actually marking. Usually he's going to have a helper. And then you're probably going to have the person that's doing the CAD rendering in the office. He's drawing everything, putting it through the program. And then you might have another person that's doing the paperwork. He's going to the courthouse, looking through all the records, et cetera. And that's kind of like what a 3 to 5 man surveying team would look like. And they're typically very efficient and can still be affordable. But your most affordable operation will be that one man operation because they're going to handle one job at a time or, 5 or 6 jobs at a time, something reasonable like that. And then they're going to have downtime. So you might be able to get a competitive rate if it just happens to be a downtime for them or whatever else. Maybe they're willing to do trades. I don't know. There's all sorts of cool stuff you can do when you have a 1 man operation. So I think that pretty much covers it. I do want to talk a little bit here at the end just about how we use surveyors and how you might best encounter a surveyor from a investor standpoint. So in the past, when I was kind of getting started buying and selling land, I used to just avoid surveyors. I'm like, that is just an unnecessary added expense that I can not worry about until the sale side, right? So I can go buy a property. And once I bring it to market and I sell it, that's when I will make sure that the seller comes in and they pay for the survey and just nothing comes out of my pocket. I still do that sometimes, but I'm leaning more towards getting the survey done on the buy side of the property. What that allows you to do is really make sure that you understand if there's anything that could cause you to not buy the property in regards to boundaries. Whether that is the neighbor's house is partially built on the property, or maybe there's specific setbacks for building on the property that make it actually impossible to build on or very difficult to build on. Or even so much as if the property itself is shifted 20 or 30 meters from what it looks like in the visual CAD map online, you could have something that had a little bit of flood zone on it and now it's half in flood zone. So this stuff matters a great deal. And in fact, I told my mountain story on the podcast in the past, if you want to listen to that. But when we surveyed that property, we actually lost 5 acres. The CAD map said that it was a 320-acre parcel. When we had the surveyor go out there and survey it, he said it was a 315-acre parcel. And we had to go through and ask how, and he never really gave us a clear answer, but there wasn't a lot of competition out there, so that's what we had to go with. So for us, we're moving towards getting surveys done on the buy side if it's clear that it's not going to cause us to lose money in the deal, right? If there's an obvious profit margin to be made and it's going to make for a safer transaction, then that's when we're going to want to get it up on the front. Also, when you're selling a property, you don't want anything that's going to cause a hiccup or kind of show up halfway through the transaction that's going to pause it or slow it down or lose momentum. When you're on the sales side of a transaction, you want that puppy moving. You want it to hit title. You want it to clear title. You want funds transferring. You want to get it closed. So if you're in an area, especially a lot of the areas that we work, which are pretty rural, there might be a famine. There might be a survey famine out there. So you could go to sell a property and the buyer wants a survey done. You contact all the surveyors in the area and they're like, yeah, it'll take us 2 months. I've had that happen to me. So you are much more likely to know what you have and be ready to sell it in a timely fashion if you get that survey done on the front end. Yes, it's an extra cost, even sometimes a delay, but it can also be a point of negotiation. So you might have a property under contract, look it over on a map and be like, I just don't know where the boundaries are. It looks like it could actually be this way or that way. Hey, I'm still willing to buy this property at the purchase price. Can we just deduct the price that I'm going to have to pay to go get it surveyed? So oftentimes you're even able to wiggle that survey cost into the price of the purchase. And sometimes it allows you a little bit of grace. It might give you a couple weeks to go round up funding or something like that if you need, if it allows you to go get a survey on the front end. Now, from the retail buyer's perspective, a survey for me is a must. Okay. So if your plan is to not flip this property, or rather you plan to hold on to it for a while, that survey is very important because you want to know exactly what you're getting, right? So for me, I'm more experienced. I buy and sell land all the time. It's just, I have a better understanding of the likely risk of me buying a property that's unsurveyed. Whereas if you're not buying a lot of property, maybe you buy one or two pieces of land a year. Well, I would expect you to be very cautious in that process, especially if you're buying something that you're going to be holding for a long time or that maybe you want to do a forced appreciation strategy on in the future. Having that at least a boundary survey or even something which they call a corner survey, where they don't even do the full boundary, they just mark the corners of the property, can just give you a lot of peace of mind that you know exactly what you purchased and you can go out there and you can go look at the markers and have a very clear understanding of what you're walking away from when you send that wire off to the title company. Okay, well, as usual, folks, thank you so much for hanging out with me and talking all about land. Went a little over what I was hoping to, a little over the amount of time I was hoping to spend on this, but hey, it's an exciting topic. I get excited about anything as it relates to land. So, as usual, if you are looking to buy high quality land at the best prices, go to primelandexchange.com, start building your land portfolio. I can't tell you, there's no better way to invest your money. In fact, I'm doing podcast here shortly where I'm comparing investing in land to investing in gold. Ooh, what's better? Hmm. If you're an investor and you need funding, check us out. Go to landpartnerfunding.com. The application's there. You can check out our rates, the various options that we have for funding land deals. If you own land and you want me to develop it with you, I can help you. I can do that. Just send me an email at thelandfixer@gmail.com, or really if you just have any questions or thoughts or ideas or maybe topics that you want me to cover in future podcasts, let me know. That's the best way to reach out to me. Thelandfixer@gmail.com. Check us out, thelandfixer.com. We have links to everything you need. So again, folks, thank you for your time. I love you. Be good, and we'll talk soon.